All right, continuing on with standard of living as an economic outcome, let's talk about happiness research. There's been a debate for a long time over how we should measure standard of living across countries. And the way we just did this, which is the common way, is by looking at various income levels, per capita income levels across the globe. But some would say that income is only part of what makes people happy, that happiness needs to be directly surveyed. For example, you could have some countries that are income-wise poor, but yet people are happy. And you could have some countries income-wise where people are quite rich, but people are not happy. And this is true for individuals as well. There's some people that make a lot of money and they're not happy. They're stressed all the time. There's some people that don't make much money at all, but they're happy. So it's going to vary across individuals. And the other thing to consider about happiness research is it's highly subjective across time. So a person might rank themselves as happy at one point, and a day or two later, or quite frankly an hour or two later, not be so happy. It's a very volatile measurement, but it doesn't mean that we should use it. It does give us insight, especially if we evaluate countries over a long period of time. And that's what this World Happiness Report does. The most recent report came out in 2018. You can click on this link and download it to get more detail on specific countries and how they conduct the research. But what they find is that happiness is correlated with the income. You can see that here. So if we have an increase in per capita income, then we see an increase in happiness. You can think of these numbers, by the way, as just indexes for our purposes. These are various countries, these dots. If you run a regression and ask the computer to give you a trend line, you'll get an upward trajectory here. For those of you that understand regression, this R squared tells us the percentage of the happiness that is explained by per capita income. So this means that 56% of happiness in these countries is explained by income, which means that 44% is explained by factors other than income. Let's talk more about how income relates to happiness. When we think of rising incomes, the first thing people do is they buy necessities, food, shelter, clothing. And there is a positive correlation, and it's a strong one, meaning that as income goes up, people get much happier very quickly if the income is used to buy necessities. Non-necessities, however, are still positively correlated, but not to the same degree. So if your income goes up after satisfying food, shelter, and clothing, then you still get more happiness, but not to the same extent. Things like Starbucks and air conditioning in cars or cars themselves do enhance our happiness, but not as much as having food, having potable water, having basic health care and things like that. This implies that economic growth is going to be more beneficial in terms of happiness for poor, low-income countries than high-income countries. They will both benefit, right? Because there is a positive correlation, regardless of how high the income is. But it is going to have more impact in the low-income countries because they're going to use that income to get those basic necessities, whereas a country that is rich already has those basic necessities and may just be kind of topping it off, like icing on a cake. The World Happiness Index for 2018 shows these countries as the most happy, with Finland at number 1, Norway number 2, Denmark at 3. These Scandinavian countries almost always are in the top 5. When you continue down the list, you'll notice that the U.S. is not in the top 10. However, it's not that bad. In 2018, the U.S. ranked 18th out of 250 or so, out of 150 or so countries. So we are one of the happiest countries in the world, just not as high as some of these. You'll also note that the happiest countries, top 10, are some of the richest countries in the world as well. They're high income, high production countries. So that fits with this idea that happiness correlates with income. In fact, if you look at the actual document, you'll find that the lowest ranking countries are some of the poorest countries of the world. Okay? But there are factors other than income that influence happiness. Healthcare, education, democracy, upward mobility, taxation, and a multitude of other impact happiness. Okay, let's move on to the next outcome, and that's economic growth. Economic growth is increases in real gross domestic product or real gross domestic product per capita. So either we grow the pie or we grow the slices over a particular period. Normally, GDP is measured in quarterly periods over the course of a calendar year. Okay? The initial conditions for economic growth are important to consider. This is the starting point, and it includes the economic system, the environment, and the policies that spawn that growth. Some countries have better starting points than others, and an example of this would be the US and Cuba. If we go back to the post-World War II period, most notably the early 1950s, we see the US starting with an economic system that is much more market-oriented, whereas the Cubans adopted an economic system that was much more centrally planned, following the Soviet model. And even though the US and Cuba have a similar environment, I mean, Florida, for example, is a good maybe 4-hour flight from Cuba. So the environment of Florida is similar to the environment of Cuba, yet Florida has grown rapidly since 1953, whereas Cuba has not. Another example, of course, is North Korea and South Korea. Around the same time, North Korea adopted an economic system that was like the Soviets. It was more centrally planned, whereas South Korea adopted the American style of free enterprise markets. North Korea has barely grown since, but South Korea has been an engine of economic growth and a highlight in that region of the world. There are two types of growth we want to consider: extensive and intensive. Extensive growth means we expand inputs, which causes a growth in GDP, but not per capita GDP. An example of this would be if the US were to double its population, we could potentially produce twice as much GDP. But that doesn't mean the slices of that GDP pie would be any bigger, because even if the pie is twice as big, you would have twice as many people consuming it. So we say there's extensive growth when the GDP grows, but not per capita GDP. This is common in infant economies that have very rapid population growth, savings growth, and natural resource growth. What happens is they do grow their economy because they have more people, and more savings translates into more capital equipment to produce, and more natural resources is usually the ability to extract those resources improves. But they're growing their population so fast that they don't see an increase in their per capita GDP. India is a good example of this. India, since the 90s, has had double-digit growth in annual GDP, but they haven't witnessed that same growth rate in their per capita GDP. So the pie is getting bigger, but people don't feel it in terms of their slice. In contrast to extensive growth, intensive growth is where we make the inputs themselves more efficient. Okay, we make labor more productive. We make machines more productive. We are able to utilize our natural resources in a more productive way, more efficient way. This allows for growth in per capita GDP. It's reflected where we have an environment conducive to growing technology, and that means certain institutions and an overall economic system that allows for technological advancements. Examples might be providing intellectual property rights for those that come up with new technologies, and allowing for a profitable environment for people that advance technology. This is most common in mature economies where we see rapid technological advancements, but lower population savings and natural resource growth. It's almost like you go from infant economies to mature economies, and people have less babies, they save less, and we've already extracted a lot of the resources that would otherwise have been available. That doesn't mean that mature economies don't advance, though. We grow more through technology than we do through increasing the amount of inputs we're utilizing. And the OECD countries best reflect this today. This stands for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. It's a 37-member organization that brings together a lot of the higher income countries that share similar challenges. Okay, now let's move on to some actual data around economic growth. Okay. This data here shows the US and what has happened over time from 1880 to 1995 all the way to a projection of 2040 in terms of lifetime discretionary hours. Discretionary hours are those hours that we are not sleeping or doing basic maintaining of life, like eating or brushing our teeth. You'll note that lifetime discretionary hours have increased and are projected to increase over time. Well, how does that happen? We live longer, greater longevity, and greater longevity is tied to economic growth. Improvements in the water supply, making for safer drinking water, improvements in healthcare and the diagnostic tools that assess disease before it becomes deadly, improvements in education so people can make better lifestyle choices, a safer work environment. The jobs of today are more white collar and less dangerous than the jobs of the past, which may have involved working the elements. So we want to keep in mind that greater longevity is not just about healthcare, it's also about growing many aspects of our economy. We also have seen an increase in the amount of leisure time, notice it goes up, and a decrease in the amount of work time, labor time. So not only have we witnessed growth in income per capita, growth in longevity, but we've also witnessed a growth in our leisure time. So we work less and get more. That all comes from sowing the seeds of economic growth. Another thing that's not captured here is the types of jobs we have. Yes, we are having to work less, but we also have jobs that may be more intrinsically pleasing. Go back 100 years in the US and you were pretty much in a manufacturing plant or on a farm. I think over half of workers were in those industries. Well, people don't do those jobs because they have a passion for them. They do them out of necessity. But today, a lot of people, they go to college and they get trained in an area that they enjoy and want to work in. And even if they don't go to college, they find a vocation that aligns with their interests. Not everybody, but those options are more available to people today than they would have been 100 or 200 years ago. And so when we think of economic growth, yes, there is an increase in material abundance, but there's also these non-material elements that matter as well. And those tie into happiness and standard of living in ways that just looking at the dollar figures don't convey. Take a look at this chart here. On the vertical axis, it shows the average lifespan, longevity, and on the horizontal, we have various periods in history. What's notable here is the relationship between longevity increases and economic growth. For Europe and its offshoots, the Industrial Revolution took place around this period here. And you'll notice that this is where we really start to see the growth in longevity. Whereas in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the Industrial Revolutions didn't take place until this period or later. That's where we see longevity increasing. That tells us that operating with a simpler life, not creating an environment for economic growth, doesn't just cost us material things. It costs us longevity. All right, that's it for this video. We'll pick up from here in the next one. Thanks.